Rain hammered down in relentless sheets, beating a frantic rhythm on the steel roof of the armored van. Flashing blue lights sliced through the darkness as the convoy crawled its way across the sodden expanse of Salisbury Plain. Every headlight flicker painted the world in ghostly white, revealing glimpses of mud, barbed wire, and the hunched silhouettes of soldiers standing guard in the wet. Inside the van, Lady Eleanor Whitmore sat shackled, her wrists rubbed raw from the handcuffs. Her posture was as upright as her situation allowed, the old Whitmore pride refusing to bow, even now humiliated under the stern gaze of military police. Raindrops ran down the steamed glass, making the outside world blur and twist, a fitting mirror for the chaos in her mind. A sharp crack of thunder sent a shudder through the van. One of the guards flinched. Eleanor didn't. She stared ahead, jaw set, her eyes shadowed and distant. Her once immaculate uniform was now stained with mud and sweat. The House of Whitmore's crest, dulled and dirtied, but still there. A silent rebellion stitched in gold. The van jerked to a halt at the gates of HMP Ravenscroft, the high-security military prison. Searchlights swept the yard, pinning everything in cold, merciless white. The iron gates groaned open. A soldier barked an order. The door was yanked open, letting in a surge of cold wind and rain. Eleanor blinked hard, but didn't let them see her falter. "Out!" one of the guards ordered. Eleanor slid from the van, boots hitting wet tarmac with a slap. Rain battered her face, streaming down her hair, soaking through what little protection her coat offered. Still cuffed, she kept her chin high as the guards flanked her. They marched her through puddles and mud, past razor wire, under the scrutiny of countless cameras. Somewhere close, lightning split the sky, bathing everything in electric blue. Across the yard, through the storm, a monstrous shape loomed behind bars, a stallion's silhouette rearing against the steel. Sterling. Even from a distance, Eleanor recognized her champion. Chestnut roan coat shining with sweat and rain, Sterling lashed his tail, snorted, and struck the door with a hoof. The sound rang out, clear and wild, louder than the thunder. The guards pulled her to a stop, but Eleanor twisted, wrenching her head toward the paddock. For a split second, her eyes met Sterling's across the darkness and wire. His ears pricked, recognizing her even in this hellish place. "Hold!" a guard snapped, tightening his grip. Eleanor wrenched her arm free just enough to stagger to the fence. She pressed her forehead against the cold bars, the world narrowing to the breath and heat of her horse. "Stay noble, boy," she whispered, her voice barely audible beneath the storm. "You're still a Whitmore." Sterling tossed his head, mane flying. He whinnied, long, mournful, echoing over the rain. The guards tugged at Eleanor, impatient, but for one heartbeat she stood her ground, refusing to look away. A brutal hand closed on her shoulder. She was dragged away, boots slipping in the mud, but she didn't resist. Eleanor threw one last look back at her stallion. Sterling's eyes burned, wild and loyal, promising he would wait. The walk to the prison block was endless. Floodlights cast harsh shadows. The scent of wet concrete and diesel filled the air. Inside the main building, the world became colder, more mechanical. Whitewashed walls, reinforced doors, cameras in every corner. The clang of each gate closing behind her sounded like a sentence being passed. Her escort said nothing, offering no comfort, only orders barked over radio static. Eleanor's mind ran wild, replaying the last 30 hours. Her arrest, the headlines blaring betrayal, the shame of being paraded through corridors where once she had been saluted and admired. Now, she was a traitor in chains. Her processing was swift, impersonal, fingers inked, mugshots taken. An officer read out her rights with a face like stone. Violation of Official Secrets Act, awaiting trial, maximum security. They led her through echoing corridors to a bare, narrow cell, concrete bed, stainless steel toilet, a slit for a window letting in the howl of the storm. They unshackled her wrists at last, the sudden freedom burning more than the cuffs ever had. The door clanged shut. Silence fell, broken only by the distant sound of rain and Sterling's cry. Eleanor sank onto the cot, rainwater pooling at her feet. She squeezed her eyes shut, head in hands. Her body trembled with cold, exhaustion, rage. Images flickered through her mind. The bright green of the Gloucestershire fields, her mother's smile, Sterling's powerful stride as they cleared the last fence at Windsor. That was another life, a life of glory, loyalty, and pride. Now, all that remained was the storm, the iron bars, and the knowledge that the world outside believed her guilty. A flash of lightning lit the cell, throwing her shadow tall and fierce against the wall. Eleanor opened her eyes. Guilt gnawed at her, but beneath it something older stirred, defiance. She was a Whitmore. She would endure. Outside, Sterling called again, his voice cutting through the night, a sound of hope against the rain. Eleanor drew in a steady breath. Let them say what they wanted. Let the storm rage. She would not break. 30 hours before her world turned upside down, Lady Eleanor Whitmore stood in the tunnel behind the main arena at the Royal Windsor Horse Show. The buzz of thousands in the stands thrummed through the ground, echoing with the roar of anticipation. Sterling danced at her side, ears flicking forward, the chestnut roan's muscles quivering beneath his glossy coat. The heavy clouds threatened rain but held off, as if the sky itself paused to watch the spectacle unfold. The announcer's voice boomed over the loudspeakers. Next, representing Gloucestershire and the historic Whitmore stud, Captain Lady Eleanor Whitmore riding Sterling, multiple Ascot champion. A polite ripple swept through the crowd, then rose as those who recognized the name and horse whispered among themselves. The House of Whitmore was old, its lineage entwined with British history, and Eleanor, in her sharp household cavalry uniform, carried the weight of centuries on her slim shoulders. She drew a deep breath, centering herself, feeling Sterling's energy pulse through the reins. In the stands, she glimpsed a flash of gold, her mother's brooch, pinned askew on Lady Whitmore's coat, her smile bright despite her cloudy, drifting eyes. Eleanor smiled, nodded once, then let her face go impassive as she and Sterling trotted out into the dazzling glare of the arena lights. They moved as one, every stride measured, every cue subtle. Eleanor's seat was a study in grace and power, her back straight, hands soft but sure. Sterling surged into a gallop, mane flying, the crowd's gasp swelling with each fence they cleared. A sea of faces blurred past. Children waving little Union Jacks, elderly veterans in their medals, royal dignitaries seated with careful poise. At the last jump, Sterling gathered himself and soared, clearing the gate with inches to spare. The stands erupted. Cameras flashed. Commentators tripped over superlatives. Eleanor reined Sterling in, heart pounding, and saluted the royal box where the princess sat, nodding in approval. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath, basking in the glow of her victory. Eleanor bowed her head, humility masking the fierce joy that rushed through her veins. Brigadier Harold Forsyth approached, his uniform immaculate, his handshake firm and practiced for the cameras. The man's face wore a veneer of congratulatory warmth, but his eyes glinted with calculation. He presented Eleanor with the winner's cup, his grip lingering just a second too long. "Outstanding performance, Lady Whitmore. I'd expect nothing less from a Whitmore and a horse like Sterling," he said, voice pitched low enough for only her to hear. "The ministry has been following your career closely. There's a project underway that could use your particular expertise." Eleanor cocked an eyebrow. "Another demonstration for the palace? Or are you after my horse's autograph?" Forsyth's lips curled in a half-smile. "Neither, I assure you. This is something that could shape the future of British cavalry and national security. We're calling it Project Iron Spur. Cutting-edge tech, equine and human. I'll explain over dinner tonight, if you're free." A flicker of warning darted through Eleanor's mind. She'd heard rumors, whispers of military contracts and experimental tech. Still, her curiosity was piqued. "I'll think about it," she said, keeping her tone light. Forsyth bowed slightly. "I hope you do. Enjoy your victory, Captain." He moved away, already locking eyes with an admiral across the arena. Eleanor watched him go, the sense of unease growing at the edges of her celebration. As the afternoon faded, the showgrounds transformed from a place of competition to a swirling hub of gossip and backslapping. Photographers swarmed Eleanor and Sterling, snapping pictures for society columns and military newsletters alike. Children approached, wide-eyed, and Eleanor dismounted, letting them stroke Sterling's velvet nose. A teenage girl with sharp green eyes and a streak of blue in her hair pushed forward. "Is it true you trained Sterling yourself?" Eleanor nodded, tousling Sterling's mane. "He was born at our farm. My family's bred horses for centuries. He's the best I've ever known." The girl grinned. "Dad says you're going to change the way the army does everything." Before Eleanor could respond, a man in a faded jacket called the girl back. Oliver Grant, her old university friend. He gave Eleanor a sheepish wave. "Sorry, Mia's a handful," Oliver said, pulling his daughter back gently. "Congrats, Elle. Sterling looks incredible. You both do." Eleanor felt some of the tension in her shoulders ease. "It's good to see you, Ollie. Feels like we were students just last week." He grinned, eyes flicking to Forsyth in the distance. "Careful. That one collects secrets like they're trophies." Eleanor studied her old friend. "You working for the ministry now?" Oliver hesitated. "Consulting. They've got me tinkering with some new biosensor tech for cavalry units. You know how it is. More wires, fewer answers. I'll fill you in after the gala. I'm not sure I trust everyone here." As dusk settled over the grounds, Eleanor led Sterling back to the stables, the last notes of applause fading behind her. The air was heavy with the scent of grass and rain, thunder threatening on the horizon. Eleanor lingered by Sterling's stall, stroking his face, letting her guard down for just a moment. Beyond the fences, a world of politics and ambition spun faster than any horse race. Eleanor glanced back at the showground, sensing the beginning of something bigger. A storm gathering, not in the sky, but in the corridors of power. Sterling nickered, nuzzling her hand. Eleanor smiled, whispering, "Whatever happens, we ride together." Rain began to fall, soft at first, then harder, washing the victory from the banners and soaking the fields. Eleanor stood in the darkness a moment longer, listening to the world change. The last celebration was over. The rain had faded to a misty drizzle by the time Lady Eleanor's battered Land Rover turned onto the long gravel drive of Whitmore Hall. The estate emerged from the Cotswold fog like something half-remembered from a storybook. Old stone walls streaked with ivy, a sweeping front lawn, and clusters of ancient oaks lining the boundaries. To outsiders, it was a symbol of history, stability, and noble English tradition. To Eleanor, it was home, but also a fortress, one she was never sure she fully belonged to. She eased the car to a stop and sat for a moment, fingers resting on the worn leather steering wheel. The events of Windsor still buzzed in her ears. Applause, Forsyth's veiled invitation, Oliver's warning. She exhaled, slow and steady, and glanced back at Sterling in the horse trailer. The stallion had settled, dark eyes reflecting the faint golden glow of the house's windows. Eleanor gathered her things and headed inside, boots echoing on the marble of the grand foyer. The air was filled with the faint scent of beeswax and old books. Portraits of grim-faced ancestors watched her from the walls, their eyes following her progress, as if to remind her of all she was meant to protect. She found her mother, the Countess of Whitmore, in the small sunroom overlooking the garden. Lady Whitmore sat in a high-backed chair, wrapped in a cashmere shawl, her hair a cloud of silver. On her lap, a tabby cat purred, indifferent to the world's troubles. "Mother," Eleanor greeted softly. The Countess looked up, eyes sharpening with recognition, before drifting off again, as if focusing was a task requiring immense effort. "You're back early, darling. Was it raining at Windsor?" Eleanor smiled. It held off. Sterling won the cup. Lady Whitmore's face lit with pride, a rare, bright expression that made her seem decades younger. "That's my girl. The Whitmores have always had a touch with horses. Did you wear the brooch?" Eleanor nodded, moving to kneel beside her mother. She took the Countess's hand, thin and cool, yet still surprisingly strong. "I wore it for luck." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, the only sounds the ticking of the grandfather clock and the distant murmur of stable hands bedding down the horses. Outside, dusk had settled, cloaking the rolling hills in a gentle purple haze. "Your father would have been proud," Lady Whitmore murmured suddenly. "He used to ride out at dawn, rain or shine, just to remind the world we Whitmores were still here. Not that the world ever really cared. Not since the wars." Eleanor squeezed her mother's hand. "We keep the name alive. That's what matters." The Countess's gaze grew distant. "And the honor. Never forget that, Eleanor. Titles, money, horses, they come and go. It's the family's name that must remain clean, even when the world is not." Eleanor felt a twist of guilt, thinking of the secrets she already held, the pressure mounting in her chest. She wanted to say something, to ask for advice, but she stopped herself. Her mother's mind was sharp one moment, fogged the next. Eleanor had learned not to burden her with the shadows of modern scandals. They shifted to lighter topics: local village gossip, the stubbornness of the Whitmore head gardener, a fond memory of Eleanor as a girl galloping a pony bareback across the orchard. For a short time, the weight of the outside world faded, replaced by the gentle rhythms of home. A flash of headlights in the driveway signaled the arrival of Stan Holloway, the longtime stable manager. He came in with a respectful knock, doffing his flat cap. "Evening, Lady Whitmore, Captain. Sterling's all set, ate his feed, already snoozing. Fine work today, ma'am." Eleanor stood, offering Stan a grateful smile. "Thank you, Stan. I don't know what I'd do without you." He grinned, lines creasing the weathered leather of his face. "Likewise, miss. Your father always said, 'Take care of the horses and the rest will follow.' Don't you let those men in London turn your head now. They don't know one end of a horse from the other." Eleanor laughed, tension easing. "I'll keep that in mind." After Stan left, Eleanor escorted her mother upstairs, tucking her into bed beneath a quilt stitched by generations of Whitmore women. The Countess reached for her daughter's hand one last time. "Promise me you'll do right by the family, Eleanor," she whispered, her voice suddenly fierce, eyes clear for just a second. "No matter what storms come." Eleanor bent and kissed her forehead. "I promise, Mother." Downstairs, the house grew still. Eleanor wandered into her father's study, drawn by habit. Dust motes danced in the lamplight, the shelves still lined with histories and cavalry manuals, war medals glinting in a display case. She sank into the old leather chair, gazing out the rain-streaked window, heart heavy. On the desk, an envelope sat with her name, her mother's careful hand across the front. She opened it, unfolding a yellowed letter. Her father's script, faded but steady. "Eleanor, you will inherit more than land and horses. You will inherit enemies, and friends who may become them. Remember, courage is the only armor no one can steal. Stand firm, trust your horse, trust yourself. All my love, Father." The words brought a sudden ache to her chest. She traced them with her finger, eyes stinging. Down in the stable, Sterling shifted, hooves thudding quietly against the straw. The world outside was changing, faster than even her ancestors could have imagined. Eleanor rose, folding the letter with care. She made her way back to the hallway, pausing before the gallery of family portraits. For a moment, she felt all those watching eyes, their silent demand that she hold the line, that she not let the Whitmore name fall. She squared her shoulders, her resolve steeling. Tomorrow, she would see what Forsyth truly wanted. Whatever secrets waited in the shadows of Whitehall, she would face them, head high, like a Whitmore. Outside, the rain finally stopped, leaving only the hush of the English night and the soft promise of dawn. Dawn crept in on a thin gray light, the kind that left the Cotswolds shivering in mist and damp. Lady Eleanor woke to the sound of rain beating gently against her window and the far-off nickering of horses. For a moment, it felt like any other morning, the routines of the estate stretching ahead, mucking stalls, checking the pastures, strong tea in the breakfast room. But as she sat up, Eleanor's mind snapped back to the world beyond these walls. Forsyth's invitation, Oliver's warnings, the heavy legacy pressing in around her. By mid-morning, she was back in her old battered Defender, splashing through muddy lanes toward the Wiltshire garrison. The Royal Windsor trophy rode shotgun, a hollow reminder of yesterday's glory. She found Oliver waiting for her outside the base's security office, his raincoat flapping in the wind, hands shoved deep in his pockets. "You made it," he said, voice pitched low. "Thought you'd bail." "Never," Eleanor replied. She managed a half-smile, but the tension between them crackled like static. "You said you had something urgent?" Oliver glanced around. Soldiers coming and going, a pair of MPs eyeing them from beneath dripping berets. "Not here. Walk with me." They made their way past rows of neat brick barracks, through the echoing clang of parade ground drills, into the quieter edge of the stables. Sterling wickered a greeting as Eleanor entered, the familiar scent of hay and horses grounding her. Oliver followed, pulling a flash drive from his pocket. "I downloaded some logs from Sterling's biochip last night," he murmured, his voice dropping as he fiddled with his phone. "Something's off. His heart rate hit redline for nearly 30 minutes after you left the ring. He should have collapsed." Eleanor frowned, stroking Sterling's neck. "He's tough, but that sounds impossible. Did you tell the vets?" Oliver shook his head. "Not yet. I checked the chip myself. This isn't the device we installed. It's been swapped. The serial number's different. The software's running in debug mode. Someone replaced it, Elle. And they did it without leaving a trace in the logs. At least not the official logs. Eleanor's heart pounded. Who would do that? Whoever's running Project Iron Spur, maybe. Or someone with access to your horse and the ministry's kit. Oliver's eyes darkened. If they're running secret tests on Sterling, you need to know. But if I go digging alone, I'll be flagged in minutes. Eleanor's thoughts raced. Forsyth, his smooth assurances, his interest in her horse and her reputation. What do you need from me? Oliver looked at her, serious now. Help me get into the base's secure data center tonight. If we pull the real logs, maybe we'll know who's behind this. Eleanor nodded, the Whitmore resolve taking over. Tonight, then. As evening fell, the garrison's energy shifted. The sound of drills faded, replaced by quiet chatter and the clink of dinnerware. In the stables, Eleanor moved with purpose, checking Sterling, chatting with the stable hands, making herself visible and ordinary. No one suspected a thing. Just before midnight, she slipped out through a side door, boots muffled on wet gravel. Oliver waited by the old supply shed, nervously bouncing on his heels. "You sure about this?" he whispered. "Let's move," Eleanor replied, her voice steady, almost cold. They kept to the shadows, skirts of light spilling from guard towers just missing their path as they skirted the edge of the parade ground. At the administration wing, Oliver produced a key card. "Borrowed from the IT manager, don't ask," he said, managing a grim smile. The corridor beyond was quiet, only the hum of vending machines and a flickering security monitor for company. Eleanor kept her head down, military bearing blending with the darkness. They slipped into the server room, heartbeats thudding loud as gunfire. Oliver went to work at the terminal, fingers flying across the keyboard. Lines of code scrolled, security doors unlocked with a soft click. "Cover me," he hissed. Eleanor listened. Boots in the distance, radio chatter, a distant clock ticking. Her nerves buzzed. She flashed back to her father's lessons on patience and risk. Sometimes you had to leap before the net appeared. "There," Oliver breathed. "Here are the logs. Look, there's an entry for Sterling's chip at 23:07 last night. It was wiped and rewritten by someone using admin credentials. They routed it through a test server on the other side of the base, beyond the normal firewalls. That's ministry-level access, Elle." Eleanor leaned in, studying the screen. "Can you copy them?" He nodded, sliding in the flash drive. "Give me a minute." A voice echoed from the hall. "Oi, who's in there?" Oliver froze. Eleanor shot him a look. Now or never. He yanked the drive free, closed the terminal, and the two of them slipped out through a side door, hearts hammering. In the dark, they circled back toward the stables, ducking behind a row of parked vehicles as a pair of MPs stomped past. A dog barked, nose to the ground, but didn't catch their scent. They kept moving, adrenaline buzzing, the base's lights now seeming to chase them from every angle. Finally, inside Sterling's stall, safe for a moment, they looked at each other. Oliver's hands shook as he handed her the flash drive. "Don't plug that into anything on the base," he whispered. "If they trace us—" "They won't," Eleanor said, pressing the drive into her jacket. "But someone's been sabotaging my horse, and they want it covered up. We need to know why." She stroked Sterling's mane, feeling the tension and affection in every muscle. "Thank you, Ollie. You didn't have to risk this." He shrugged, trying to smile. Old friends don't leave each other in the lurch, especially not when there's a Whitmore horse at stake. Eleanor exhaled slowly, listening to the steady rhythm of Sterling's breathing, the clock ticking somewhere in the dark. They were in deeper than ever, but for the first time she felt a thread of hope, thin, fragile, but real. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving only the cool hush of midnight and the promise of answers to come. The morning broke with an unnatural quiet, the kind that makes even the birds hesitate. Eleanor awoke, still fully clothed, the stolen flash drive burning a hole in her jacket pocket. The events of the previous night spun in her mind. The covert dash through the garrison, Oliver's fear, the lingering sense that invisible eyes were watching them even now. She rubbed her eyes, bracing herself for whatever the day would bring. She barely had time to gather her thoughts before her phone started buzzing. First a single message, then another and another. By the time she reached for it, the screen was a flood of notifications, news alerts, and missed calls. Urgent. Fire at Wiltshire base. Lady Whitmore involved? Military sources claim sabotage. Eleanor's pulse jumped. She threw on a jacket and bolted out of her room, almost colliding with Stan in the hallway. The old stable manager was ashen, clutching a mug that rattled in his hands. "They're saying it was you, Captain," he muttered. "News vans are already down by the gates. Don't go outside. Someone's camped out in the hedgerow with a telephoto lens." Eleanor forced herself to stay calm. What happened? Explosion at the fuel depot just after sunrise. Massive fireball, lots of smoke. Militaries locked down everything. They say it was deliberate and... He hesitated, voice dropping. "The MPs are headed this way, with a warrant." Eleanor's heart raced. This couldn't be real. She needed to warn Oliver, to see her mother, to get her bearings, but already the storm was closing in. From outside, she could hear the rising swell of voices, the shrill call of sirens, and the unmistakable thump of a military helicopter slicing through the morning haze. She ducked into her father's study, pulling the curtains tight, and powered on her laptop, hands shaking. The homepage was a wall of headlines. Lady Saboteur, aristocrat accused of base attack. Defense Ministry in crisis. Elite horsewoman under investigation. Her phone rang. It was Oliver. "Elle, don't say anything, not to anyone," he hissed. "I tried to warn you, but they're moving faster than I thought. Someone's planted evidence, texts, emails, it's everywhere. Stay inside. I'll..." A heavy knock on the front door cut him off. She killed the call, heart hammering. Stan was already at the entrance, back straight, eyes hard with loyalty. The MPs didn't bother with pleasantries. They swept into Whitmore Hall in a blur of uniforms and black boots, reading out their search warrant with mechanical precision. "Lady Eleanor Whitmore, you are under investigation for violating the Official Secrets Act and suspected sabotage of ministry property. Surrender all communication devices and remain where you are." They seized her phone and laptop, rifled through her drawers, even checked her mother's room. The Countess, confused and frightened, demanded answers but got only cold stares in response. Eleanor tried to stay calm, head high, as they read her rights. Through the open window, she caught a glimpse of cameras flashing, her disgrace broadcast for all the world to see. In the chaos, she saw a familiar figure. Arthur Blake, the former Guardian reporter, now a disheveled, relentless vlogger. He was waving a microphone, trying to shout questions through the gates as police pushed him back. "Lady Eleanor, are you taking the fall for the ministry? Did you expose a cover-up?" His voice was drowned by the chaos, but Eleanor met his gaze for one brief moment, and in his eyes she saw something that looked like hope. Someone still believed her. The MPs led her away in handcuffs, the world outside erupting in camera flashes and shouted accusations. A swarm of reporters pressed against the barriers, shoving microphones and smartphones into the air. It felt like a waking nightmare, a lifetime of discipline and honor reduced to a tabloid headline. In the back of the armored van, Eleanor tried to steady her breath, the sting of cold steel on her wrists serving as a cruel reminder that everything could change in an instant. Through the narrow window, she saw Sterling in his paddock, ears flicked forward, pacing restlessly. She wanted to shout to him, to tell him she hadn't abandoned him, that she'd fight her way back. At the base, she was processed again. Fingerprints, mugshot, property logged. The MPs barely met her gaze now, their professionalism strained by the gossip swirling around them. Whispers echoed in the corridors. Traitor, saboteur, disgrace. She overheard a guard mutter, "She had everything, why throw it away?" The reality of her new world settled on her like a heavy cloak. Inside the interrogation room, under the harsh light and the buzz of a camera recording every twitch and sigh, she faced a panel of military investigators. Forsyth was not among them, but his fingerprints were everywhere. In the questions they asked, the evidence they laid out, the cold certainty in their eyes. Where were you between 5 and 6 a.m.? Why did your phone send encrypted messages to a foreign server? How do you explain these texts arranging access to the fuel depot? Eleanor answered with the truth, her voice steady. She explained her night at home, her routines, her horse, the impossibility of the charges. But the panel's faces remained stony, unmoved. By midday, every major news network was running the story. The phrase Lady Saboteur trended online, memes and opinion pieces exploding across the internet. She watched it all unfold from her cell, her legacy, her family, and everything she'd worked for teetering on the edge of ruin. Somewhere, someone had orchestrated all of this. The planted chip, the doctored logs, the phony messages, every step had been mapped out to destroy her. She replayed the last few days in her mind, searching for the crack, the moment when trust became betrayal. Night fell, and Eleanor lay awake on the thin mattress, the world spinning just out of reach. Through the small barred window, she could just make out the silhouette of Sterling's stable in the moonlight. She pressed her hand to the cold wall, whispering into the dark, "I won't let them win. Not now, not ever." And as another day ended, Lady Eleanor Whitmore, branded a traitor, began to plan her fight back, even as the whole nation seemed determined to see her fall. There was a peculiar silence inside HMP Ravenscroft, a silence Eleanor felt more than heard, as if the very air was thicker, heavier, weighted down by secrets and sorrow. The clank of steel doors, the cold glare of strip lighting, the ceaseless whir of cameras above every corridor. This was her new reality, and it pressed in on her from every angle. No sweeping lawns, no fresh hay, no blue ribbons or the gentle nicker of Sterling to greet her. Just stone, metal, and the sharp scent of disinfectant. Her cell was barely wider than her outstretched arms. The bed was a slab with a thin mattress, the blanket too short, the pillow flat. A slit of a window let in a slice of gray daylight and a few haunting calls from the crows that circled above the razor wire. Eleanor had lost track of the hours, time measured only by the opening and closing of doors, the scraping of meals through the slot, and the endless cycle of lights up, lights down. Each morning, she forced herself to sit up straight, to breathe deep, to press her spine against the back wall and remind herself, "You are Eleanor Whitmore. You are not broken." Some days it was harder than others. News filtered in through whispers from the guards, through the buzz of radios outside her cell, through the guarded glances of other inmates who recognized her name. In here, reputation was a double-edged sword, protection for some, target for others. Her only company was her mind, circling over every memory, her father's steady voice, her mother's drifting laughter, the solid warmth of Sterling's muzzle pressing into her hand. She replayed her arrest 100 times, each moment sharp and raw, searching for some detail she might have missed, some clue that could turn the tide. On the third day, the guards came for her with a brusqueness that set her nerves on edge. They shackled her wrists, not out of necessity, but for protocol, for the spectacle. Down endless corridors they marched her, past faceless doors and humming cameras, until they reached the small, sterile visiting room. A sheet of reinforced glass separated the prisoners from the visitors. A single plastic chair waited for her, the other side empty, until a slender figure appeared, clutching a bright envelope in trembling hands. Mia Grant, Oliver's daughter. The guards signaled for them to sit. Eleanor picked up the heavy black phone, pressing it to her ear. Mia mirrored her, eyes wide and worried, her jaw set in the stubborn tilt Eleanor remembered from Windsor. "Hi, Captain Whitmore," Mia began, her voice quivering a little. "Dad said, he said I could visit if I promised not to ask about everything." Eleanor smiled as best she could, trying to project calm across the divide. "Thank you for coming, Mia. It means a lot to see a friendly face." Mia hesitated, then pressed the envelope up against the glass. It was covered in stickers, childish drawings of horses, one unmistakably Sterling, right down to the wild splash of white across his nose. "I made you a card," Mia said softly. "Sterling's okay. I saw him this morning. He's standing at the fence, waiting for you. He wouldn't eat his carrots until I promised to tell you he's being good." A lump formed in Eleanor's throat. She swallowed, focusing on Mia's words, willing herself not to cry. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick. "That's more important than any newspaper story." Mia fidgeted with her sleeves. "Are you scared?" Eleanor paused, searching for the truth, the kind that would help Mia, not hurt her. "I'm angry," she admitted. "But scared too. Not for myself, really. I'm scared for Sterling, for my mother, for everyone caught up in this mess. But I have to believe the truth will come out. And sometimes, when I can't sleep, I think about riding across the field with Sterling again. I remember what it feels like to be free." Mia nodded, chewing her lip. "Dad's working on something. He wouldn't say what, but he told me to tell you, don't give up. He said sometimes the good guys have to lose everything before anyone listens." Eleanor managed a wry smile. "That sounds like Oliver. Tell him I'm holding the line, like he always said." A guard cleared his throat, signaling the visit was almost over. Mia pressed her hand against the glass, and Eleanor did the same, the plastic cool beneath her palm. For a heartbeat, it felt like a promise passed between them. Hope, fragile but real, slipping through even the thickest of walls. Back in her cell, Eleanor opened the envelope. Inside was a card covered in glitter and bright felt-tip hearts. "Don't give up. Sterling believes in you, and so do I." It was signed in looping script, Maya and Sterling. She sat on the edge of her cot, card pressed to her chest, breathing in the courage she needed to survive another day. The world outside was still spinning, lies still spreading, her name still smeared across headlines. But here, in this steel box, Eleanor found something the world couldn't touch. She traced Sterling's drawn face, eyes wild and brave. No matter how they tried to break her, she would not give in, for Sterling, for her family, for the truth. Night crept in. The lights dimmed. The crows went quiet. Eleanor whispered into the darkness, "Hold on, boy. I'm coming back." And for the first time in days, she slept, dreamless but strong, her spirit unbroken. Rain battered the rooftops of London as Stan Holloway hunched over Sterling's royal saddle in the repair shed behind the mews. The old leather gleamed beneath the harsh work light, stitched and restitched over the decades, bearing the marks of countless parades and victories. Stan's hands moved with the precision of a craftsman and the love of a man who devoted a lifetime to horses and riders who never truly belonged to him, but who trusted him just the same. He had been told to patch a tear in the girth. Nothing unusual. But as he ran his fingers beneath the deep padding, feeling for a split in the stitching, something odd caught his attention. A thin plastic edge. Stan frowned, grabbed his seam ripper, and carefully teased the padding open, working loose a square of material far newer than the rest. Inside, sandwiched deep in the old saddle's guts, was a tiny SD card, camouflaged in black tape. Stan's heart hammered. He had seen enough in his years to know when something had been hidden with purpose. He glanced over his shoulder, aware of the cameras even in the staff quarters, and quickly slid the card into his shirt pocket. For the rest of the morning, every footstep in the corridor, every muffled voice in the yard set Stan's nerves on edge. He worked silently, eyes darting, while the world outside seemed to move faster, as if a storm were gathering over London itself. At lunch, he called Mia on the stable phone, using an old code from his days with the royal household. "I need a word, quick-like. The usual bench by Tower Bridge, and come alone." He hung up before she could answer, wiped his hands, and pulled on his old waxed coat. Outside, traffic snarled through the rain, the city's pulse relentless. He walked with purpose, head down, one hand never leaving the pocket where the card lay. A secret that could save Lady Eleanor, or doom them all. Mia was already waiting, her school backpack slung over one shoulder, a woolen hat pulled down over her eyes. She glanced up as Stan approached, her face pale and serious. "I got your message," she said, her breath clouding in the damp air. "What's wrong?" Stan sat beside her, lowering his voice. "You trust Lady Eleanor, don't you?" "With my life." He nodded, glancing around. "Good. Because you need to get this to someone you trust. Quick. Not the police, not the army. Someone who will actually look at it before the wrong people know it's gone missing." He pressed the SD card into her hand, closing her fingers over it. "I found it hidden in Sterling's saddle. It's something big, Mia. The kind of thing people might kill for." Mia's eyes widened. "What's on it?" "Don't know. But it's got to be tied to all this mess. Maybe it's what the ministry's so desperate to keep hidden." He looked away, jaw tight. "They've been watching everyone, even old Stan. Be careful, kid." Suddenly, a black van screeched to a halt at the curb. Two men in suits jumped out, their faces hard and cold, eyes sweeping the crowd. "Get down!" Stan hissed, pushing Mia behind the bench. "Run for the steps, now!" Mia bolted, tucking the card into her sock, heart pounding as she weaved through startled tourists and street vendors. The men gave chase, shoving aside anyone in their way. Stan lumbered to his feet, waving his arms, shouting, "Oi, she's just a kid! Leave her alone!" But the men ignored him, sprinting after Mia as she darted onto the footpath along the Thames. The rain turned the stones slick and treacherous. Mia skidded, nearly falling but kept going, clutching her backpack tight. She ducked beneath a bridge arch, emerging on the far side, feet flying. Horns blared as she dodged across the street, the black van now circling in the road. She spotted a mounted police officer ahead, the officer's horse steady amidst the chaos. Thinking fast, Mia sprinted up and pointed at the men behind her. "They're chasing me! Help! Please!" The officer swung down, stepping between Mia and her pursuers. "Problem here, gentlemen?" The two men hesitated, flashing badges that didn't look quite right. "Government business, officer. Step aside." But the officer shook his head, blocking their path. "You can discuss it at the station. This girl's under my protection now." Mia barely had time to thank her rescuer before the officer hustled her into the back of the police van, slamming the doors as the black car peeled away into the rain-soaked traffic. Inside, Mia's heart hammered so hard it hurt, but she kept her hand pressed to her sock, feeling the small, hard shape of the SD card. "Don't worry," the officer said, glancing in the rearview mirror. "We'll get you somewhere safe. Want to tell me who you are and what's going on?" Mia hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. But she remembered Eleanor's words, the promise of loyalty and courage. "My name's Mia Grant. I have something that could prove Lady Eleanor Whitmore's innocent." The officer's eyes flickered with surprise. "Well, let's make sure it doesn't fall into the wrong hands, all right?" As the van sped through London's maze of wet streets, Mia stared out at the city, the secret pressing against her skin, and wondered if she had just become the key to unraveling everything. Back at the Mews, Stan watched the black van vanish into the drizzle. He wiped the rain from his brow, muttering, "Hang in there, Eleanor. The truth's out there now. Just gotta survive long enough for it to matter." Somewhere in the city, a clock struck noon, and for the first time since the scandal broke, hope cut through the gloom like a ray of sunlight on the Thames. The city woke under a sky so clear it felt ceremonial, as if even the weather knew something momentous was coming. Flags lined Whitehall, their colors vivid against the autumn gold of the plane trees, and the air buzzed with anticipation and reverence. It was Remembrance Sunday, London's most solemn day, when the nation gathered to honor sacrifice, to remember what must never be forgotten. At dawn, Lady Eleanor sat on her bunk in Ravenscroft, staring at the card from Mia, tracing Sterling's hand-drawn outline with her thumb. She could hear the bells of Westminster far off, echoing through the stone corridors. She imagined the crowds assembling, the bands tuning their brass, the household cavalry gleaming in their dress uniforms. Somewhere out there, Sterling was saddled, shining and proud, a symbol of what she once was, what she could be again. Across the city, the pieces were moving. Arthur Blake, phone in hand, rehearsed his lines beneath the cenotaph. He had the SD card now. Mia had handed it off to him at the police station, under the careful gaze of an officer who promised to make sure it reached the right people. The card's video file was loaded and ready, set to stream on a massive LED screen the city council had rented for the ceremony. A simple USB drive, and the fate of reputations would shift forever. Brigadier Forsyth strode down Whitehall, his uniform immaculate, medals catching the sun. He greeted dignitaries, his voice crisp, face a perfect mask of leadership and sorrow. As he stepped onto the main stage, the applause was respectful, restrained. Only those who knew him well would see the glint in his eye. Not pride, but calculation. He was here for the cameras, for the history books. He had won, or so he thought. The crowd grew silent as the bands faded. The Prime Minister and the Archbishop both spoke. and then it was Forsyth's turn. He took the podium, voice echoing over the sea of red poppies and Union Jacks. "We remember not only the heroism of the past, but the duty that binds us all," he intoned. "The cavalry, the infantry, the families who give everything for king and country. Today," a sudden flicker of static cut through the sound system. The LED screen behind the stage, set to display a roll of honor, instead went black. A murmur rippled through the crowd. On the big screen, shaky night vision footage began to play, grainy but unmistakable. First, Forsyth himself, deep in the stables at night, barking orders at a handful of soldiers. "Wipe the logs. I don't care if the horse keels over. We need results." Then another clip. Forsyth training Sterling late at night, running the animal through stress tests, firing blank rounds to spook him, his voice cold. "It's a beast, not a person. Just property." The crowd gasped, a rising roar of confusion and anger. Arthur Blake's voice, crisp and urgent, piped through the loudspeakers. "This footage, found hidden in a royal saddle, reveals a cover-up. The real traitor isn't Lady Eleanor, but the man who betrayed the very ideals we gather here to honor." Forsyth spun toward the stage crew, face paling. "Cut the feed! Who let this—" His voice was drowned out by the reaction of the crowd. Cameras whipping around, journalists pushing forward, snapping photos, shouting questions. Uniformed police and military security rushed the stage. Forsyth tried to back away, but they caught him, hands gripping his arms, snapping steel cuffs around his wrists. He shouted, "This is a setup! Fake! It's all fake!" His voice cracked with panic, the mask slipping at last. But the evidence was clear, playing again and again as the world watched. Forsyth's greed, his disregard for duty, his readiness to sacrifice not just horses but reputations and lives. At Ravenscroft, the news broke instantly. Guards whispered, then opened Eleanor's cell. "You'd better come with us, ma'am." She was led to the warden's office, television blaring, as the BBC anchor announced, "New evidence has exonerated Lady Eleanor Whitmore of all charges. Attention now turns to Brigadier Forsyth, who is in custody and faces a full inquiry." For the first time since her arrest, Eleanor's hands shook, not with fear or rage, but with hope. She blinked at the sunlight pouring in the barred window, hardly able to believe it was over. Her body felt both light and heavy, like she was stepping from deep water onto land. Meanwhile, on Whitehall, chaos churned. Forsyth, now in custody, was dragged past the ranks of soldiers and television cameras, his once proud uniform a hollow costume. The Queen's representative addressed the crowd, restoring the ceremony's dignity, but the day's meaning had changed. The truth had pierced the armor of lies. The old order had been upended, and the nation watched, stunned, ashamed, and in many corners, relieved. Outside, Arthur Blake found Mia Grant waiting by the barriers, wringing her hands. He handed her the now famous SD card, a small, proud smile breaking through his grizzled features. "You did good, kid," he said. "Lady Eleanor owes you." Mia grinned, tears brimming in her eyes. "She'll come back. I know it." Back at the base, Stan Holloway leaned against the stable door, listening to Sterling's gentle breathing. The old man wiped his eyes as the news came through his phone, a slow, shaking laugh bubbling up in his chest. "You did it, miss," he whispered, stroking Sterling's mane. "You held on, just like you promised." In the city, church bells rang, not just for the fallen, but for justice restored. In her cell, Eleanor closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank you," to her friends, to the horse who never gave up, to the ancestors who taught her to stand firm. The world outside was wild with noise and change, but within her, a quiet strength took root. The truth was out, and the world could never go back. Freedom, Eleanor realized, was not the thunderous moment the prison doors slid open. It was quieter than that, something that dawned gradually as she stepped into the pale morning light outside HMP Ravenscroft, her belongings packed into a brown paper sack, her name restored by the stroke of a judge's pen. The world outside seemed both unchanged and impossibly new. The wind smelled of wet grass and wood smoke, the sort of scent she'd nearly forgotten in the antiseptic hush of prison. A government car waited, its engine humming softly. Stan Holloway stood by the gate, his flat cap pulled low against the early sun, tears glimmering in his creased eyes as he tipped his head in greeting. "You're a sight for sore eyes, Captain," he called, voice thick with emotion. "Didn't doubt you for a second." Eleanor tried to answer, but her voice caught. She pressed a hand to her heart and smiled, walking straight to Stan and embracing him as tightly as her dignity would allow. "Thank you, Stan, for everything, for never letting Sterling go." He grinned, stepping back, his pride and relief as obvious as the morning sun. "Couldn't have, even if I'd wanted to. He'd have busted through the stable door himself to find you. He's waiting back at Whitmore Hall, ma'am, healthy as ever." The drive home was a blur. Faces at the gates, curious townsfolk peeking from shop fronts, a handful of reporters trailing at a distance, but none daring to approach. By the time the car turned down the familiar gravel road to the hall, Eleanor's heart hammered with anticipation, fear, and a fierce, grateful joy. The estate looked as she'd left it, sprawling fields, the stone house silvered with dew, horses grazing under the willows. For the first time in months, it felt like home and not a memory. She stepped out, almost stumbling as she ran toward the stables. Sterling stood at the gate, his coat glinting with health and vigor, eyes fixed on her with that deep, knowing intelligence she'd always treasured. At the sight of her, the stallion reared and let out a cry that echoed across the fields. "Hey, old friend," Eleanor whispered, hands trembling as she reached for him. Sterling pressed his forehead into her shoulder, warm breath misting in the morning. For a long moment, there was nothing but the two of them, reunited and unbroken, the weight of the past weeks dissolving into sunlight, and the rhythmic sound of hooves pawing the earth. Inside the hall, Lady Whitmore waited, more fragile than before, but eyes shining with pride and relief. The reunion was quiet, just the three of them. A pot of strong tea and the old family dog curled at their feet. The Countess squeezed Eleanor's hand and whispered, "You brought our name home, my darling. You held the line. That's all any Whitmore could ever ask." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes, but for once she let them fall, not ashamed but cleansed. They spent the afternoon walking the fields, Stan regaling them with tales of Sterling's stubbornness, the local vicar dropping by with flowers and a handshake. News crews still hovered at the edge of the property, but Eleanor ignored them. They would fade, eventually. All scandals did. As the sun set, casting gold across the meadows, Eleanor saddled Sterling, her first ride as a free woman. She rode bareback, hair loose, wind in her face, Sterling's stride powerful beneath her. They galloped the length of the property, through wild grass and down by the river, past the spot where her father once told her, "A Whitmore never runs from the truth." Every stride seemed to shake loose the last of her shame and fear, the tension that had built up behind walls and under the eyes of strangers. At the highest point of the pasture, Eleanor drew Sterling to a halt, breathing hard, heart wide open. She closed her eyes and listened, to the wind, to the quiet creak of saddle leather, to the distant laughter from the house. This was her legacy, bruised but unbroken, and she meant to honor it, not by hiding in the past, but by forging something new. When she returned to the house, Oliver and Mia were waiting, the girl bouncing on her toes, unable to contain her excitement. "Did you see?" Mia shouted, running to hug her. "You're all over the news, but it's the good kind this time. They called you a hero." Eleanor laughed, lifting Mia off the ground. "If I'm a hero, it's because I had friends who believed in me. You, your dad, Stan, even Sterling, especially Sterling." Oliver grinned, clapping her on the shoulder. "We couldn't let you take the fall for a bunch of cowards and thieves. Welcome home, Elle." That night, the hall was filled with music and voices, neighbors streaming in with gifts and casseroles, the old tapestries echoing with warmth and laughter. Lady Whitmore raised a toast with the last of the family sherry, her voice trembling but proud. To truth, to courage, and to the future. Eleanor joined in, glass raised high, feeling the pulse of hope through the room. But even in celebration, her mind turned to the wounded, soldiers and civilians alike, those who had lost more than a name or a horse. There was work to be done, promises to keep. Later, standing at Sterling's stall, Eleanor pressed her forehead to his and whispered, "Tomorrow, we begin again, for all of them." The moon rose over the Cotswolds, silvering the fields, blessing the homecoming with peace and the promise of new beginnings. 1 year later, the Cotswolds were waking to spring. Fresh grass rippled in the wind, the hedges shimmered with new green, and Whitmore Hall was alive with sounds not heard in decades. Children's laughter floated from the paddocks, the steady clip-clop of hooves echoed on the old gravel, and voices rang out, some shy, some joyful, but all free. The once solemn stables now buzzed with life, transformed from a private preserve into the heart of something Eleanor could hardly have imagined in her darkest days. The Whitmore Equine Trust. It had started quietly. A handful of letters, a meeting with the ministry, a stubborn insistence that what happened to her would mean something to others. Eleanor had watched too many veterans return home carrying invisible wounds, too many children adrift after loss or trauma, too many good people failed by systems meant to protect them. She wanted more than justice for herself. She wanted to create a space for healing, one that honored both the history she'd inherited and the future she could build. On this bright morning, Eleanor stood at the fence, watching a class of children, some wheelchair-bound, some simply shy, taking turns brushing a patient old mare. Stan supervised with gentle good humor, while Mia, now a junior instructor, showed a nervous boy how to hold the currycomb. "It tickles," the boy giggled, the fear in his eyes melting away. Mia grinned. "That means she likes you. Horses don't care who you were before, just who you are now." The words hung in the air, truer than Mia knew. Eleanor smiled, pride swelling in her chest. Sterling watched from his own paddock, ever the dignified champion, but he too had softened, allowing tiny hands to stroke his nose and teenagers to lead him across the ring. He had become more than a symbol. He was a partner in the work, the heart of the trust. Inside the old carriage house, Lady Whitmore presided over tea and biscuits for visiting parents. Her memory sharper on some days than others, but her delight in the children always clear. She insisted on teaching them the names of the horses, the history of every trophy on the mantel, the proper way to pour tea. The walls rang with stories, some sad, some funny, all threaded through with the quiet resilience of the people who came here. Oliver Grant, now the Trust's resident tech wizard, had helped design a new line of humane biosensors for equine therapy. No more hidden sabotage, just data that kept the horses safe and the kids learning. The ministry, eager to polish its reputation after the Forsyth scandal, had funded new stables and a therapy arena. But Eleanor kept tight control. She refused to let politics poison what had been hard-won by truth and pain. Arthur Blake visited often, filming documentaries and interviewing the riders, his stories of the Lady Saboteur, now replaced with tales of hope and stubborn kindness. Even the tabloids, once ravenous for scandal, had moved on, though occasionally a photographer still turned up, hoping for a quote. Eleanor would greet them at the gate, polite but firm, always redirecting their attention to the kids and horses. Today, as sunlight poured into her study, Eleanor prepared for the annual open house. She pinned the Whitmore crest to her lapel, not as a shield, but as a promise, of integrity, of community, of second chances. On her desk was a stack of letters from parents, veterans, and students, each one a testament to what this new chapter meant. One, in particular, caught her eye, a note from a young woman who had found her voice in the barn, who now volunteered at a city shelter, who signed off, "You helped me learn that courage is quieter than I thought, but it lasts longer too." Eleanor pressed the letter to her heart. She thought of her father's words, of all the ghosts in the gallery, of the generations who had walked these halls before her. The badge and medals she'd lost to scandal didn't matter now. The family name had survived, not because of tradition, but because of love. Fierce, stubborn, unbreakable. The event began with a riding demonstration. Children and veterans alike partnered with the Trust's horses, cheered by a crowd of locals, journalists, and former soldiers. Eleanor rode Sterling at the head of the procession, their movements in perfect harmony. She gave a brief speech, her voice ringing clear across the ring. "I stand here not because I won, but because I was helped up when I fell. Whitmore Hall is open to all who need healing, all who need a place to belong. We are more than our scars. We are more than our mistakes. What matters is what we choose to do next." The crowd applauded, many wiping away tears. Lady Whitmore waved her cane in the air, beaming with delight. As dusk fell, Eleanor walked the fields with Sterling, the sound of laughter and music drifting behind her. She paused beneath the old oak, tracing the lines of the landscape with her gaze. For a moment, she let herself rest, safe, home, at peace. She thought of the lesson that had cost her so much. Titles and medals could be stripped away, but dignity, loyalty, and kindness could never be taken by force. The true inheritance of Whitmore was not land or gold, but the courage to stand for others, even when the world turns away. She whispered, "We made it, boy. We kept our promise." Sterling nickered softly, his breath warm in the cool night air. Back at the house, Mia led the last group of children inside, their faces shining with the simple triumph of trust earned and fears faced. Eleanor watched them go, hope blooming in her chest. She turned to the audience, real and imagined, who had followed her journey from disgrace to grace. "What lesson will you carry forward?" she asked, inviting their answers, their dreams. And so the story of Lady Eleanor Whitmore and Sterling did not end in scandal or shame, but in light, spreading outward, quietly, through every life they touched.